Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach. Now, President Donald Trump has announced that his envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, might travel to Moscow for talks on Wednesday or Thursday of this week. While speaking to reporters, Trump also said that he is prepared to impose additional sanctions on Russia if it doesn't reach a ceasefire with Ukraine by August 8th. Now, Russia reportedly requested the meeting ahead of the Friday deadline for a ceasefire. This comes amidst recent tensions in the past days between Moscow and Washington, which resulted in President Trump repositioning nuclear submarines after comments by former Russian President Medvedev. Joining us now to unpack these critical developments is Scott Lucas, Professor of International Politics, University College Dublin. Good to have you on the program.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Let's start with Steve Witkoff. So will he go or will he not go? If he does go, what does this mean for this deadline that's very fast approaching?
I think it's quite likely that Witkoff will go. That's the message that's being put out by officials to media outlets. What it means from the line of the Kremlin is that they are trying to play for time to push back any thought of tariffs or secondary sanctions, because that would not only hit Russia directly, it would hit their main trading partners, China and India. And that's what Donald Trump has threatened, tariffs of 100% or sanctions of 100% if Vladimir Putin does not cease fire. Now, the Kremlin know that they can play Steve Witkoff. Your viewers are watching on screen right now what happened the last time he went to the Kremlin. He did not even go with another U.S. official. He was on his own. And as he went to the table, he looked at a woman there and said, "Wait, are you my translator?" So the Americans had not even sent a translator, but had to rely on the Kremlin's translator for the meeting. Witkoff is very sympathetic to the Kremlin's point of view. He's often repeated it. So this is Russia's chance to push back on Trump, who is obviously frustrated that there is no move to a ceasefire, who's frustrated at Russia's killing of Ukrainian civilians because it doesn't give him that photo opportunity, that Nobel Peace Prize that he wants so desperately.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, given that situation, it seems, if we're looking at the rhetoric, looking at Trump, his own body language, his statements, it does seem that Trump's patience is wearing thin. He does seem to be in a different frame of mind than some weeks, even some months ago, regarding Putin and Russia.
Well, I mean, it's one thing to talk the talk, but the real question is to walk the walk, as my grandfather would say. And that is, look, Donald Trump effectively gave Vladimir Putin a 50-day window until September the 2nd to continue the attacks on Ukraine. When he got more frustrated, he tried to shorten the window and say it'll be later on in August. But as we have seen with Donald Trump's actions, whether you talk about tariffs, whether you talk about economic policy in general, whether you talk about his approach to autocratic leaders, whether it's North Korea or China, he's very unpredictable, he's very chaotic. Now, I think there is a move within the Trump administration and within the system to toughen the sanctions on Russia and possibly on those who trade with it. So I think the U.S. system is moving towards this, but will Trump finally accept the sanctioning of Russia? That's a different question, and we won't know till we get to that deadline.
Mm-hmm. Let's also talk about the U.S. turning up pressure. I mean, we have India. It's still betting on Russian oil very much. Is this a risky play? Is this going to backfire for them? How do you see that?
I think it is a risky play for India, but I would work through a little bit of what they said publicly and what we know is happening. What happened in the recent weeks is that Indian state refiners suspended their deliveries of Russian crude oil. There are also Indian private refiners that are cutting back on some of those deliveries. And so you had 4 Russian oil tankers just sitting off the coast of India, unable to offload. Now, when this became public, the Indian government, which doesn't want to give the idea of a spat with Moscow, said, "Oh, nothing about our policy has changed. We're continuing, to have good relations with Russia." But that does not mean that privately the Indian government is actually saying to the refiners, "Yeah, pull back from those purchases of oil." And that's for 2 reasons. One is the direct threat of the secondary sanctions on India that we've just discussed. The second is that India's efforts to get a trade deal with Trump have broken down, and he's said he's going to hit them with a 26% tariff. So I think the Indian government's going to be cautious. I think they publicly will continue to say, nothing to see here, folks, all okay. But privately, I do think Indian oil sales from Russia will not be ramping up again.
All right, so we'll have to see how that plays. In some cases, some of these contracts are long-term contracts as well, so I think that's another one in play here. I want to swing back as well, back to Trump and turning up the heat. I mean, what do you make of this? I mean, the last few days after what Medvedev said, the rhetoric, and then on social media, then Trump saying very much he's going to do something, deploying nuclear submarines. I'm just curious, on the first point is, looking at the actual threat level, is this something that, raises the bar here? And secondly, in terms of the deployment, nuclear submarines, and many of them are often deployed anyway. So is this really an operational change, or is this just, let's say, a publicity stunt on Trump?
I mean, at the risk of sounding flippant, this reminded me of two wannabe bullies fronting up to each other in a bar. Oh, I'm tougher than you are. We know that Dmitry Medvedev, the former Russian president, deputy secretary of the State Security Council, particularly, let's say, if he's imbibing in a drink after hours, puts out these very provocative tweets, puts out these threats. And he did so again to Trump. Don't you give us this ultimatum, you'll see what we can do. It was closing in on a weekend, and we know that Trump, when it gets to be a Friday, just goes onto his phone and he starts putting out tweets because he's angry, he's frustrated, he wants to appear tough. And that's when he said, you look at there, I'm ordering those nuclear subs off your coast. Now, the first thing which he indicated is, Trump didn't even indicate whether these are nuclear-powered submarines. And U.S. almost always has nuclear-powered submarines off the coast of Russia, or whether they are submarines with nuclear weapons, which would be an escalation. Secondly, U.S. officials let it be known, look, there's no change in deployment here. There's no change in what's happening. So for the moment, I'm going to treat this as just very much two personalities that went after each other on social media. Doesn't fundamentally change the military situation.
But at the same time, in worrying, one former president still close to Putin, one current president, both have nuclear arsenals. I mean, as you said, just casually tweeting or posting or whatever you're doing. I mean, is this really deterrence? Is this provocation? I mean, what does this say about also credibility and announcement of this magnitude?
No, you made an important point. For everything I'm saying, trying to act logically and rationally, this is not a logical approach to deterrence. This is not a logical approach to tactics or strategy. We no longer, in Russia, you have a bit of a logic to these threats, the bullying. You'll see Vladimir Putin do it as well. Medvedev, however, takes it a bit to a higher level. But we have to be honest, especially with Poland being so important to European security. There is no logic to Donald Trump in terms of what he does. There is a logic within the U.S. system. And as you mentioned earlier, when you talked about Poland escalating its defense spending, escalating its provision of tanks, there is a logic to what Poland is doing with European security as it looks to work with the United States. But that logic in the Department of Defense, that logic in the State Department is not there in the White House. And you just have to hope that Trump's attempt to look tough, which is a personal attempt, does not lead the system to do something rash. Because we know that Vladimir Putin is threatening to do something rash. And we keep thinking he won't, but we have to be careful. We also have to think, we don't think the U.S. system would do something rash, but with Donald Trump in the White House, you cannot be complacent.
But let's play devil's advocate here at the same time. I mean, we usually hear these kind of threats and this rhetoric from the Kremlin. We're sort of used to them almost dismissing them, unfortunately. But now having Trump step forward and saying something like this, will this not also resonate a little bit closer to Putin's inner circle? Will this not have maybe that extra little push? As much as it seems chaotic from the outside, is this maybe something that can finally, plus the sanctions threat, plus this nuclear threat, is that not something to maybe, let's say, spurn Putin into some kind of different policy? Or will he just dismiss it?
The problem with that, this is the old madman doctrine that we had under Richard Nixon back in the Cold War days, which is if you threaten the Soviets, they'll back off. They won't escalate. That'll be a form of deterrence. The problem here is that even if you think Trump is following that logically, is that the Kremlin doesn't back off. I mean, the Kremlin doesn't back off with that nuclear threat for two reasons. One is, got to be honest with you, I don't think they think Trump will follow through with it. But secondly, they also treat it as a challenge. And we know that they simply have responded to this latest Trump threat by saying, look, we've got more nuclear submarines than you do. You know, you go off and try it. But more importantly, they respond to it with what is really important regarding Ukraine, which is they don't stop the attacks on civilian areas, they escalate them, and they don't back off of their ultimata for Ukraine's surrender, they double down on it. So far from Trump's nuclear threat giving us the prospect of Russia ceasing fire or saying we're going to back away from trying to seize part of Ukraine and making it capitulate, it only makes the Kremlin more determined to do that. And I think to take this all the way back to the top where we started the discussion, they're going to combine that tough stance, we're not backing down, with those pictures of Steve Witkoff saying, but we'll be really nice to your envoy at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, it's going to be another one of those Kremlin plays. We'll see how it does actually develop. Just 20 seconds. I want to get your last bit, just commentary. Also, speaking of military matters with the Chinese, this is from the Wall Street Journal, looking at very much about the restricting critical materials, rare earths, basically to a point where they want to see that this does not get to military production. How much does this endanger U.S. military supplies in the middle or long term? Just briefly now.
It's an issue, but it is tied up with the issue of the tariff talks between the U.S. and China. If we get a reasonable landing position in the tariff talks between the U.S. and China, this goes away. If those tariff talks go badly, China will put the pressure on.
All right. Okay. So again, another delicate situation in a very precarious world. Look, always a pleasure speaking to you. There's Scott Lucas. Always appreciate the insight. Thank you so very much.
Thanks to you and your viewers.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay tuned. Much more coming up right here on TVP World. Goodbye.